Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about another person that is a famous person that is important to history, and they also have something to do with our five senses. So I'll know if you're listening to my story because I'll have some questions for you during the story and at the end. Okay, close your eyes and imagine sitting in a dark room with no windows and earmuffs covering your ears so you cannot hear anything. Imagine that you can't see and you can't hear anything or anyone. Imagine that you can't talk either. Now imagine that you've got to stand up and move around this dark and silent room using only your hands and feet to guide you. How would you feel if you had to stay in this room? You'd probably feel startled and frightened by everything and everyone who touched you. You'd probably feel sorry for yourself or frustrated or discouraged that you cannot tell anyone what you are thinking or what you need. Well, that is what was life really like for a girl named Helen Keller. Helen Keller was born a long time ago, over 150 years ago. When Helen Keller was a baby, she caught a disease that made her lose completely her eyesight and her hearing. For the rest of her life, she was blind and deaf, so that means she could not see or hear, living in a world of total darkness and silence. Life was very hard for Helen Keller as she grew up. She became frustrated and angry because not only was she blind and deaf, she was not able to talk or communicate with other people. She felt sorry for herself and was often mean to other people. When children tried to play with her, she broke their toys. One time, she locked her mother in a room so she could not get out. At dinner time, Helen walked around the table smelling everyone's food. If she smelled something she liked on someone else's plate, she would eat it. Helen Keller felt her way through the world, groping and fumbling in silent darkness. Her senses of touching, smelling, and tasting were her only connections to the outside world. As an adult, she remembered those days by saying, "I literally thought with my body." The only memories that she had of this time was sensations or feelings or things from her senses. She remembers that when she was very upset, she used to run outside and bury her hot face in the cold leaves and grass. Guided by her sense of smell, she would make her way through the garden until she came to the roses and violets that calmed her down. Helen Keller's mother and father loved her very much, but because she could not understand the world around her, she seemed disobedient or naughty and hard to control. When she was 6, her parents hired a special teacher named Anne Sullivan to take care of Helen at home. When Anne Sullivan came to stay with the family, she figured out Helen was behaving badly because she was frustrated and angry. Anne Sullivan knew that if Helen could break out of her dark world and learn how to communicate with other people. But to communicate, Anne knew Helen needed to learn a lot of words. Anne Sullivan knew because Helen could not hear or talk, she would not learn a word. She started teaching Helen Keller words using her finger to write and spell them on Helen's hand. When Helen splashed water, Sullivan took Helen's hand and spelled out the letters water in her hand. When Helen Keller pointed to herself, Sullivan spelled out the word Helen in her hand. To Helen Keller, learning from Anne Sullivan was like being born again. Suddenly, the world was not confusing and frightening. Helen Keller later said, "I had been a little ghost of a no world. Now I knew my name. I was a person. I could understand people and make them understand me." For the first time, Helen had a way to tell people what she was thinking. When Helen wanted to speak to Anne, she wrote words on her hand. However, it took out a long time to spell out the sentence. Eventually, Anne taught Helen sign language so she could communicate with others. So here's another real picture. It doesn't have colors, it's black and white. That's how we can tell it's an old picture. To make signs for letters and words. People use sign language to speak to people who are deaf of hearing or impaired. For Helen Keller, there was an extra challenge. She also could not see. She had to touch the other person's hands while they were making signs to communicate. Let's look at these letters. Why don't you try some of these? For example, we could start at the top with A, B. So this is how people talk to each other that can't hear talking. Helen loved learning so much that Anne knew she would love reading books. Helen left home to go to a special school for blind children, and Anne Sullivan went with her. She learned to read books in Braille, a special writing with raised dots on the page. Using Braille, Helen was able to read words by touching them. At school, she made a lot of friends and earned excellent grades. Helen was determined to succeed, and with Anne's encouragement, graduated from high school and college. Later in life, Helen Keller became a famous writer and speaker. In her books and speeches, she told the remarkable story of her life. People were amazed that Miss Keller never gave up and was able to overcome the challenges of being deaf and blind. Okay, so I have some questions. Here's a picture of her as a grown-up. What is the lady's name that we talked about? Helen Keller, good. What things can you remember about her when she was little? She was kind of being naughty because she was deaf and blind. Good. Who is Anne Sullivan? Her teacher. Good. What is Braille? Let's look at the picture. So this is Braille. It's a way for people to read by touching the paper if they're blind. What do you remember about Helen Keller as an adult or a grown-up? So here's a picture of her. She is talking to people, doing a speech. Okay, do you think that the things in this story are true, or are they made up or fantasy? They are true. Good. These are true things that happen to a real person. Okay, this is a good question that I want to ask you. We had a story yesterday about Ray Charles. How are Helen Keller and Ray Charles the same? So a couple of things. They were famous when they were adults for doing amazing things. They both were blind. Both of them were blind. How were Helen Keller and Ray Charles different? So Ray Charles could hear, Helen Keller couldn't hear or see. Good. Okay, and Ray Charles was a famous musician, and Helen Keller just was famous also for doing special things and helping other people and telling people about being deaf and blind. All right, friends, have a great day. Thank you.